Hello and welcome to Spirit Pig. Inspired by the mission 7 billion fulfilled people, I tracked down the greatest thought leaders on the planet and interviewed them about happiness and fulfillment. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Dennis McKenna. Dennis is an ethnopharmacologist, author and founder of Symbio Life Sciences. He has dedicated his career to the study of hallucinogens and psychedelics and is a founding board member of the Hefter Research Institute, a non-profit organisation dedicated to investigating therapeutic uses of psychedelic medicines. He has conducted extensive ethnobotanical fieldwork in the Peruvian, Colombian and Brazilian Amazon and has recently completed a 4-year project investigating Amazonian ethnomedicines as potential treatments for cognitive disorders in schizophrenia. Dennis and his late brother Terence McKenna are considered pioneers among plant medicine scholars. So it is a huge, huge honour. I've wanted to get Dennis on the show for absolutely ages. So thank you so much for saying yes, and I'm really looking forward to this chat.
Thank you, Duncan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Our brains are programmed to kind of filter stuff out, but psychedelics can actually temporarily disrupt that and actually I think it was described as like let the background come forward. Could you maybe just explain that a bit more and maybe give some examples?
That's right. The brain, in a way, it synthesizes a reality. We don't live in the real world. We live in a model of reality, and that's a hallucination, if you will, that our brains construct, taking in information from the outside through our sensory neural interfaces, our eyes and ears and other senses, taking information. And a lot of what the brain does is filter information, because if everything that impinges on our senses came through, it would just be a blooming, buzzing confusion. We'd be completely discombobulated. So the brain is very selective about what it lets in. And in neuroscience, this is actually called gating. It's called sensory gating. And the brain selectively lets things in, and then it processes it through the neocortex, the younger part of the brain, through associations, memories, maybe a fragment of memory, something you saw on TV last week, a song you heard 20 years ago, all of this stuff is a big mishmash in your brain. But the brain takes what it processes from outside, it mixes it with all this association, and somehow it turns it into a product that makes sense, sort of, right? I mean, that's the model of the world that you inhabit. That's the hallucination that you create. You're the director, star, and writer of your own movie, and that's the movie that you're living that we call ordinary consciousness. And there really is no such thing as ordinary consciousness. The fact that there's consciousness at all is not ordinary, but people make a distinction. Well, you're not on drugs, so, you're in ordinary consciousness, right? But in fact, you are on drugs. We're all on drugs every minute of the day because we're made out of drugs. We're biochemical engines that run on drugs, neurotransmitters, hormones, enzymes, all these molecules in organisms that mediate communication. Those are drugs. Essentially, you extract serotonin out of the brain or dopamine or one of these things, which you can do if you injected that, it would be considered a drug and probably made illegal. Right? So And they've done this. Well, DMT is a good example, dimethyltryptamine. It is a natural component of the human brain. Everybody has it. What its functions are in the brain, we're not so sure, but we know that if you smoke it as a drug, it's a powerful, very short-acting psychedelic. And the brain naturally makes it. So we all need to go down to the local police station and turn ourselves in for possessing a controlled substance, because it's in our brains.
Is this tied in with this idea? Because I've heard you reference Simon Powell in his book, The Magic Mushroom Explorer, describes psilocybin as a lens.
Yes.
Is this tied together? Or why does he call it a lens? What's that about?
Yeah, I love Simon Powell. I so love, that's great that you know his work. Yeah, I am a real Simon Powell fan. And he writes very intelligently about psilocybin. And one of the points he makes, I think it's really important, is that it is a lens. All of these things are lenses for examining both the inner world and the outer world from a slightly different perspective, and sometimes a profoundly different perspective. So they provide, we develop habits and we develop habitual ways of apprehending the world and interpreting what we experience and so on. Psychedelics temporarily disrupt that, and they enable you to look at things in a fresh way, that and notice things even about external phenomena. And this is the point Simon makes that I think is really important. They are actually scientific instruments in a certain way because they give you an opportunity to examine things going on outside your inner state, uh, and notice things about them that you normally wouldn't notice. This is the thing about bringing the background forward.
Mm.
This is part of this sensory gating operation that the brain does. It's convenient to push most things into the background, and only a few things are gathering your attention. It's the things that are relevant to what's immediately going on. You have to be paying attention.
Specifically survival, I guess. Like, if
Yeah, or
survival, yeah, we're going to take notice. If we can't, then yeah,
tigers coming after you. You want your attention on that.
yeah.
Not what the leafcutter ants are doing, but you don't have to
So
pay attention
beautiful.
to notice things that you normally don't. And this gating is interesting. I mean, you can be in a noisy restaurant, for example, and you're trying to filter out the conversation all around you so you can focus on what's being said at the table. But if someone at the next table or a couple tables over says your name,
Immediately,
yeah,
your ears prick up and you hear it straight away.
who's talking about me and what are they saying? So it's very useful, but a lot of times it's not relevant to your immediate survival. And if you can temporarily disable it, then you notice a lot of things in going on in the environment that you're sort of programmed to ignore.
Mm.
And you can see this very much if you go into nature with an indigenous person, or I would dare say a child, because children don't have this conditioning either. They're like totally open. They're like on acid all the time. They're completely open. They don't have these filtering mechanisms. And if you go with an indigenous person who spends all his time or her time in nature, living close to nature, that person is going to notice many more things about the environment that you're not aware of until they're pointed out. So these psychedelics are in part tools for training perception in a certain way. And that in that sense they're lenses. And then you can turn the lenses around and you can look on the inside and see what's going on in there with your inner state. And of course, we have to remember inside, outside, these are all meaningless terms, right? There is no inside, there is no outside, there is no separation between you and the rest of the world. These are all constructs, this hallucination that you've created.
Western culture, like, no longer really have traditional rites of passage. Like, why is that problematic, in your opinion?
Why is it problematic that there are no rites of passage in our
Yeah.
culture? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
absolutely.
Well, I think that's just, that's part of it. I think that in general, our culture is toxic. Our culture goes out of its way to um, essentially to profane everything. Uh, I think part of the cultural crisis of our times is that people long for meaning. They long for meaningful experiences,
Yeah.
memorable experiences. Again, that's why psychedelics are so important. Because they are one of the they're a way to trigger these intensely personal, meaningful experiences, like mystical experiences, like anything that's significant in your life. And that's kind of one of the functions that rites of passage fulfill. You remember that, just like you remember the first time you kissed a girl, you remember the first time you made love, you remember, these things stick to our memory. And they're unique in that nobody can do that for you. You can't hire somebody to kiss a girl for the first time, and maybe someday that'll be possible, but I hope not. I hope not, because that's like giving up this, right to our very own personal, unique experience. And this is what I really think is important about psychedelics. They're nothing if not personal. No one can have your trip for you, and no one can tell. They can tell you all sorts of things about what they think it means, and they may have a point, they may be full of shit, you just don't know, but you know what it means.
Yeah.
And I think that as a culture we long for these meaningful experiences, and we've gone out of our way to make sure that people don't have them. And this is the problem with religion. Religion is supposed to be a conduit to spirituality and meaningful experiences, but the organized religions are set up to make sure you never get near an actual mystical experience. I mean, that's the most terrifying thing in the world to them, is that someone should actually directly contact the divine. They have a whole infrastructure of hierarchies of priests and so on. I mean, you're supposed to go through the channels if you want to connect with God, and this going around that and taking taking a substance and going out in nature. I mean, that is strictly forbidden. So I think that's the problem with rites of passage, or that is, we don't have them, and our educational institutions are not set up to encourage it, and I think it's a pity. I mean, you got to take some risks sometimes. You have to push the envelope a little bit.
When you turn on the news any day of the week and you see it could be anything, all these moments of crisis, be it a shooting, be it anything, do you feel that those are symptoms of, I think it was the spiritual emptiness of our culture, and actually psychedelics could be the antidote to that? Because I guess it's a lack of, we talk something on the show that we talk about quite a lot is connection, and one form of that is obviously in terms of your social life, in terms of your relationships, but actually a deeper connection to nature, connection to something bigger, higher, feeling like you're a part of something, you're part of one big sort of global family. I know that sounds a little bit sort of tree huggery, a little bit hippie, but actually we are all kind of part of this global family. And maybe psychedelics is one thing that kind of becomes a common thing you hear again and again and again. Everyone has different experiences, like you said, but this whole idea of connection, like the interconnectivity of everything, how you're part of something bigger, that's a common narrative which comes up again and again and again, isn't it?
Very much so. And I think it's important to be able to step out of your reference frame temporarily. I mean, we get so wound up in ourselves, and we tend to think we're important. And this is particularly in the West. I mean, this attitude has poisoned Western culture, and what it's led to, particularly as delivered through the organized religions. Psychedelics are, in a sense, the antidote to religion, because religions are very much invested in telling you what to think, and psychedelics are encourage the opposite. They encourage you to think for yourself. I often say, I guess I'm a terrible attacker of organized religions because I don't view them as spiritually useful. They're actually ways they're methods to keep people from thinking for themselves. So they're nothing more than bludgeons, behavioral bludgeons to keep people in line, just like many of our other institutions. They're no better. They've kind of abandoned their original mission, and we are called upon to have faith by religion. You must have faith, my son, right? Which generally means you must believe in a bunch of stuff for which there's no evidence, and if you don't believe it, then you're a heretic. You don't have faith. And psychedelics, the beautiful thing about psychedelics, they don't require faith. What they require, you can be as skeptical as you want. In fact, skepticism is encouraged. What they require is courage. Enough courage to sit down and drink the cup, smoke the pipe, whatever it is, and then open yourself up to whatever that chemical messenger or that plant teacher or whatever has to tell you. There is a communication that goes on, and you don't have to believe it. It's better if you don't, and then you have it. And then, like anything else, like any numinous spiritual experience or any impactful experience, there are going to be plenty of people who are ready to tell you what it's supposed to mean, right? How you're supposed to interpret this. And psychedelic people are as guilty as this of anybody. There's usually somebody that's like, I'm the wise guy, I'm the guru, I'm the shaman, and I can interpret this for you. Within limits, that's fine, but you have to have enough confidence in people that, well, they have a brain, they can figure this out, and it encourages you to use your brain, and it puts you in touch with experiences that are very hard to explain sometimes. And yeah, you can read books or you can talk to people about what does this mean. The important thing is that you don't just accept it. You can take it in and say, well, yeah, that seems to make sense. And what this guy over here is saying doesn't make so much sense. But it's up to you to evaluate these experiences, just like you evaluate everything that's meaningful in your life. And I think that's what psychedelics teach you. They teach you a lot of things. They teach you, number one, that you don't know so much. They really make you sort of aware of the limitations of our knowledge, how little we know. And they teach you about this connection to everything, every other being and everything in the universe. These habits that we develop, that there are barriers, there are boundaries. That's an illusion. Really. We really are all one, and that's a profound appreciation if you can internalize that, and then the other thing I think it teaches you, the fact that we do know so little, it also encourages humility. It encourages, a certain, essentially, it discourages arrogance because it shoves right into your face how little we really know, and that's a good thing.
You've been taking psychedelics for almost, I think it's 50 years now, roughly. Why do you still? Why has it not been like, wow, that was lovely, I've learned a lot? What keeps you coming back? Why are you still exploring? You used the word teacher, so I don't know if that was a hint.
Well, yeah. Well, they're still teaching. I'm still learning, and I figure that will never end because there's an infinite amount to learn, and compared to what little I know, and psychedelics always remind me what little I know, and I enjoy learning, and the learning doesn't stop. It's sort of like they really are a teacher, and there are these two sort of perspectives. I mean, one is like, okay, someone, I think it was Ram Dass who said, once you get the message, hang up the phone, right? I totally disagree with that in a certain way because number one, this is not an answering machine. This is a wise being that you're communicating with, whether it's a part of yourself or something external. We can discuss that, but
Actually, it doesn't even matter, really, does it? I mean,
it doesn't matter as long as the information is coming seems valuable. And if you have a valuable teacher, if you have a mentor or someone that you look up to and respect, you're not going to say, okay, doc, I pretty much learned everything you have to tell me, so see you later. We don't have to be in touch. I mean, that's very disrespectful, and it's also it's disrespectful to yourself because you're saying there's nothing more to learn here, and so who knows what you're missing if you come away from it. I'm not saying everybody has to do it for the rest of their lives. Some people may decide to quit, and that's perfectly okay. Myself, I like to stay engaged with it because, like I say, I'm still learning, and I also think it's good for me. I think it's actually psychedelics are good for the brain and good for the body, basically, especially something like ayahuasca. There's tremendous amount of interesting information coming out now about how these things increase connectivity between different parts of the brain, and and even maybe stave off dementia and Alzheimer's. There's pretty good evidence that constituents in ayahuasca, for example, can stimulate neurogenesis, which is growth of new nerve cells. And even if it doesn't generate new neurons, it certainly generates new connections. So it keeps us young in that sense. It keeps us from, I think a big part of getting old on the psychological side, on the mental side, is you just reach a point where you're not open to new experiences. You're comfortable in your habits, and you pretty much have closed off chances to learn and discover things.
one interesting way I heard it being described was Terence described how psychedelics allow you to triangulate upon reality. So if all we have is awake or asleep, then that's it, awake or asleep, then we can't go that far. But if we have awake, asleep, and say LSD or DMT as points, then we can build a much more dimensionally rich model of consciousness. What's that about?
That they let you step out of your reference frame, and we have a reference frame, which is usually asleep, awake, or somewhere in between those things. And yeah, psychedelics let you, it's almost as though you can step out of that and maybe above that in a certain way. It's as though you're looking at it from 30,000 feet. You see things about it that you're normally, because you're boxed inside it, you're not aware of, but you can step outside it. And then every psychedelic is a little different. So you can, these other perspectives that they create, you can put down data points. I mean, the data point for LSD is not the same as the data point for ayahuasca or psilocybin. There are similarities. It's all part of the same universe in a certain sense. And neurologically, it's part of the same universe because the same sets of receptors and so on are involved. But it's not ordinary consciousness. And the more data points you put down, the wider your perspective becomes, within limits. I mean, I am not really a psychonaut. I am not one of these people that feels like, I have to try every new designer drug that comes down the pike. Some people do, and more power to them. We need people to explore that. I don't do that. I like I tend to stick with the plant teachers. I stick with the plants or natural substances, and mushrooms and ayahuasca are kind of my main teachers. Occasionally LSD, and I'm still learning a lot from them. So I don't need to try, for transmethyl hydroxy, whatever. I mean, it's good that people are working with this, but that's not me.
What do you feel the main dangers that people should be aware of? So if anyone's listening to this and they're like, that sounds fascinating, I want to explore some of these more, apart from the obvious things about, obviously being in a setting and, an environment which is safe and conducive, and especially if there's, either you've got like a sitter who has got experience with it, like those are some of the obvious things. What other things that people maybe you want to just tell them to be like maybe cautious of?
Well, yeah, the obvious things, pay attention to set and setting. I really discourage mixing these things. Some people like to do that, but I think that on the safety side, it's not. It depends on what you're mixing, but I think that's more risky, and it also sort of disrespects the medicine in a certain way. If you're going to take ayahuasca, let it be ayahuasca. Don't take mushrooms along with it or LSD along with it. Give each medicine its space, and respect it in that way, and that also avoids interactions. That's one thing. And then go at it from an informed point of view. The psychedelics are really very safe in terms of their dose and their potential to interact. But they're. I mean, that doesn't mean that you can't use them stupidly. It's good to know about dose. People's idiocy has no bounds. And there are foolish people out there that just don't know what they're doing, and they've not bothered to do their homework. So do your homework. I think Arrowhead.org, which you probably know about, is a great resource for this. These people are really good. And if you're going to take a drug that you've never taken before, go on Arrowhead.org and see what other people have said about it. See what the parameters are. So educate yourself. If you're going to take ayahuasca, make sure that ayahuasca is the one that this comes up with mostly, but make sure that nothing you're on is going to interact with monoamine oxidase inhibitors. That can be a real problem. So have an idea about, if you're on SSRIs or any of that kind of thing, you really should not take ayahuasca until you've gone off it for at least 3 weeks, because there's a potential for an interaction there. And then I guess, this is all really about pharmacology and safety and, the actual potential for physical harm from the substance. But then the other side of it is, these things, how to put it, the information you get from the psychedelic state is not necessarily good information. These things can be tricksters sometimes. So in evaluating the download that you're getting, don't just accept it without uncritically. If a wild, crazy idea comes to you, like, if I make a certain sound, I can collapse the space-time continuum. I have a certain book that I can recommend to you. Hey, wait till the next day and see if that still sounds like a good idea. I mean, seriously, you can get into some very delusional states. And, you do need a reality check at some point. And, and that's just common sense, So being able to when these things come and it just seems overwhelming, being able to find your center and, be in that center while the winds are raging around you is a very useful skill. And if you can just, learn to calm down and sort of don't reject, enjoy the funny ideas. Terence used to talk about how psychedelics made you have funny ideas, which was one thing they were interested. Funny ideas are inherently dangerous as well as interesting, but you have to apply a filter of common sense and analytical thinking to some of the funny ideas that come up with psychedelics. So that is potentially a danger.
This is a bit of a random question, a bit of a detour. What's your thoughts on the advancements of VR and virtual reality? This ties into addiction, I guess, but do you know, be a sense of escapism where people wanting to live in alternate worlds rather than deal with the problems in their own lives?
And this is already going on. We don't need VR to appreciate how distracted we are. I mean, the culture is just chock full of things that are trying to grab your attention. VR is just another iteration of that, and it's interesting how, these new technologies that come along, these new entertainment technologies, the videotape, the VR, all of these things. I mean, it seems that pornography is always at the cutting edge of these things because people seek that out, I suppose, and so it'll be interesting to see where VR pornography goes. I mean, probably not to some very healthy places.
You know what?
But
There's a fascinating documentary on Channel 4. I think it's on 4OD or on Channel 4 in the UK, called "The Sex Robots Are Coming," and it's about this rise of artificial intelligence, sex, pornography, and it's extraordinary. I was just watching it and just thinking what on earth, but it's you see films like Her, with Joaquin Phoenix, and these other films, and extraordinary. But of course, that's exactly where we're going.
it seems so. Yeah, have you seen Ex Machina?
I haven't seen. I've seen the trailer. I haven't seen it.
That one, you got to see that one. I mean, Her is also very interesting, but Ex Machina is kind of all about this. Well, it's just an amazing movie about artificial intelligence and this avatar that this guy has created is a very beautiful robot, and very sexy and all that, and also completely without any morals or ethics in the way we understand that. So it gets into some interesting places. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's certainly going to happen, and maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it'll cut down on overpopulation or something, or But I would be interested in watching that show because this is clearly where it's going to go.
Yeah, because I was actually talking to a friend about this, and I was saying say even 15 years ago or 20 years ago, it was almost the idea of even internet dating was it seemed creepy, and now everyone not everyone, but loads of people seem to like Tinder, Bumble, all these have happened, all these dating apps, and now it's become normalized. And so now watching these documentaries on Channel 4, the ones I was just describing, and it seems that's now that's super creepy. But then, I don't know, another 15, 20 years, would that then be the new norm? And so it's that constant, where on earth, where what's happening?
It's kind of a sad commentary in a certain way, like the internet dating. Now it's accepted.
Yeah.
But it's accepted in part because look how much more isolated we've become from each other. You can't really, there are not opportunities to connect with other people in a genuine way now, or I mean, you can go to a bar, you can try to pick somebody up, and you can do that, but now I'm glad I'm old in some ways. I don't have to do this stuff, and I've been happily married for 38 years, so but young people have this issue that everyone wants to reach out. And I think the internet dating thing, that's just a way of trying to bring people together in a world where we're all kind of alone. It's ironic. We have more ways to communicate with each other than ever before, and yet we're more isolated than ever before.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's just the way society is structured. But things like psychedelics, again, in group settings, things like MDMA and so on, that's a benefit that people get out of it, that it is a heart opening thing. And it can help people connect. Alienation is kind of the key word of our times. And alienation from ourselves, alienation from each other, and importantly, I think alienation from nature.
What does a fulfilled life mean to you?
That's a tough question. A fulfilled life is a life where I said yes a lot as things came up. It's a life where I said yes to things. And I'm not, I'm as scared as anybody sometimes, but sometimes, God damn it, you just have to say yes. So that's a big one. And I feel like I've achieved that in the sense that I've been blessed. I've had a very interesting life. I have not spent my life in a cubicle, and I realize what a blessing that is. Some people have to. So that's good. And I guess the other thing, if I can look back and say, well, I was a good influence. I inspired some people, and I didn't hurt anybody too badly. That's good enough.
And what is one thing our listeners can start doing today that will have a positive impact on their lives?
Think for yourself. Just think for yourself and believe in yourself. If you have to have faith in yourself. Pretty much don't have faith in anything else. Just use your mind to think for yourself. That's what it's there for. And make of life what you will. Whatever comes your way, make of it what you will. And don't be a follower, or necessarily even a leader. Be a thinker. Be a thinker. Use your head.
Last but not least, how can people find out more about you, your work? You sent me, during the conversation, a couple of links in Skype. So I'm going to put those up, and I'm going to put them underneath the interview. If you go over to spiritpig.com, all the links that Dennis sent me will be there. But anything else, anywhere else you'd like us to send everyone?
Well, look at hefter.org. I spelled it right the second time, HEFFTER. That's like maps.org. It's doing a lot of work to advance the science and the medical uses of psychedelics. Look at my retreats if anybody's interested in going to ayahuasca retreats. I do them about twice a year. So that's the one, symbiolifesciences.com/event. And what else? Well, the ESPD 50 has kind of consumed my life this last year. So you can look at, if you want to pre-order a copy of the volume, you can do that.
Dennis, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your ideas, teaching us some new stuff. We really appreciate it.
Well, it's been a real pleasure. You're a great interviewer, and this has been a lot of fun.